or protective reassignment. At 11:20 a.m., a printed copy of the personnel deployment chart was generated in preparation for the new week's schedule. Under the section marked Internal Alert, TD's name
been a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of allegations that led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers. And in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in others, celebrities. Could it be a time of reckoning for them too? We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy's civil lawsuit and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News, a groundbreaking case brought forth just this week. When 54-year-old Shay Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th, he now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Did was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center after he was twice denied bail. Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment. But he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming. After federal investigators raided 2 of Diddy's homes back in March, we kind of had an idea something was on the way just this week. We learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victims controlled substances, at times unannounced to the victims. Prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes,
when the first images from the federal raid on Diddy's $40 million Los Angeles estate were released,
and the
no one
feds had a
expected
heads up
this.
about these
Neatly
recordings,
stacked in
thanks
display
to some of the
cabinets
civil
like prized
lawsuits
possessions
against
were
Diddy,
200
namely the
bottles
one
of
brought
baby
by
oil.
Rodney Jones,
Right next
also
to them,
known as the
over
producer
900
Lil
bottles
Rod.
of
Lil Rod
lubricant,
worked with
rows
Diddy
and
on
rows.
his Love
It
album
looked less
starting
like a
in
home and more like a
2022, and
warehouse
says
for
he
something far
experienced
more
months of
disturbing.
abuse, all
These
at
weren't
the
the
hands
kind of
of
items
Diddy
most
in his
people
lengthy
keep in
civil
bulk,
suit.
but
Lil
for
Rod refers
investigators,
to
it
these
painted a
recordings
chilling
saying,
picture.
quote,
Why would
Mr.
one of the most
required
powerful
Mr.
men in
Jones,
hip-hop need
that's
this
Lil Rod,
much?
to record
And more
him
importantly,
constantly.
what
Mr.
exactly were
Jones
they
has
used
secured
for?
hundreds of hours of footage
It
and
started
audio
with a knock,
recordings of
then a
Mr.
battering
Combs,
ram.
his staff,
On a
and his
quiet
guests
morning in March
engaging in some
2024,
serious legal
Homeland
activity.
Security
Lil
agents
Rod's
stormed
lawsuit
Sean
also
Diddy
lays
Combs'
out some
LA
other
mansion
pretty
in the
disturbing
elite neighborhood
claims,
of Holmby
like that
Hills.
Diddy sexually
Not
assaulted
long
him
after,
and
another
forced
team
Lil
hit
Rod
his
to have
Miami
sex with a
property on the Glitzy
prostitute.
Star
But Lil
Island.
Rod's
These
lawsuit
weren't
came
just
out
casual
swinging in more
searches,
ways
these
than
were
one.
federal raids
Not
with
only did it
helicopters
shed light
overhead,
on the dark
agents in full
allegations
tactical
against
gear,
Diddy,
and
but it
entire
dropped some
blocks on
high-profile
lockdown.
celebrity
What were they
names
looking for?
too. First,
That
there's
question
Academy
didn't stay
Award-winning
unanswered for
actor
long.
Cuba Gooding
Inside
Jr.
the
Lil Rod
sprawling
alleges Diddy was,
17,000
quote,
square foot
grooming him
mansion,
to pass him
agents
off to
uncovered a
his
scene that
friends.
left
This
even
fear
seasoned
became reality
investigators
when
allegedly
Mr.
plan
Combs
and
introduced
control the
Mr.
sex
Jones to Cuba
performances,
Gooding
which
Jr.
he
while they were
called
on Mr.
freak-offs,
Combs' yacht. The
and he
lawsuit
often
includes pictures
electronically
of this
recorded
too,
them.
showing both
A few
Diddy with
bottles.
Cuba
We're
and then
talking
Cuba with
hundreds.
his arms
It
around.
looked
Lil
less
Rod
like
court does go on to say, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson. In the last couple of years, there were allegations against him for sexual assault. So now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault assault others back in 20 on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse after allegedly groping a woman in Times Square. By the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling, but no jail time. Just this summer, he appeared on Dan Abrams Live, where he discussed those charges when you pleaded guilty to a forcible touching misdemeanor in 2022, eventually led to a guilty plea of a lesser charge. A year later, you settled a federal civil lawsuit. 2 more civil misconduct lawsuits. Can you understand why some would say, don't want to cast this guy? Sure, but I can also understand some people who come up to me in the street all the time and yell, show me the money, and say, hang in there, and I see what you're going through. you make movies for an audience of people, right? Right now, I'm making a movie for faith-based people who are excited to renew our hope in humanity, especially the times we're in, dealing with politics and the world issues that are going on. So that's where I am now. And have you expressed regret, sorrow, apologies for what happened previously? Everything that happens in my life is for a reason. I believe that. And if I continue to walk on my path, whatever that is, I know at the end result, it'll be to make me stronger, to be a better person, to be a better father, and right now that's the moment I'm in. Back to Melba, she says, it's possible that charges could be brought against the actor. I am getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have two different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there, and I don't that Cooper Jai Jr. is going to escape from that one because he already saw definitely people moving away from him within Hollywood circles and other circles once those first sexual assault allegations came out. So at this point, I don't think he's going to get away with it a second time. It's possible that he could face charges based on these allegations that were brought forward by Lil Rod. It is possible as well. Again, we've got the statute of limitations issue to deal with. So depending on the time frame of when this happened is, again, the Adult Survivors Act, which was the vehicle where these lawsuits came out if these civil law school suits, came out there was a fin-out amount of time for those suits to be filed. The time frame is going to be very, very important. What witnesses come forward, because again, this may not be a situation where DNA may be at play. This may be more of a situation of, hey, yes, I was there, and I recall, Koba Juning Jr., putting his hands on the L-Rod, or I, recall certain aspects. So it's going to be a very witness-intensive type of case. And the question is, will witnesses be willing to come forward? Another high-profile name listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Jennifer Lopez. From the standpoint of the names of the celebrities that were tied to this, the fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in or party to a shooting at a nightclub when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy. And that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing his quote, "Rico Enterprise has existed for at least dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC when Mr. Combs required his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court also alleged Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27, 1999 at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy, Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar Guns, were drawn, and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to home country of Belize. Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him because of this allegation. Experts like former FBI agent Bobby Chone say investigators could take a second look at the shooting. If there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation, what would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago? Well, it would take it would take a different look at it. So, in other words, he was acquitted on the state murder charges. Now federal charges can be different. You can have RICO, you can have a continuing criminal enterprise, you can have, the underlying acts, the predicate acts, if we used to call them when I worked RICO cases, a RICO predicate act could be something like that, 1999 case, and you can use it as a predicate act. You can bring it up. You can, when I worked cold cases of this type, sometimes with the passage of time, people aren't as intimidated and they're not as threatened, and they get away from the person who is the threat, and they feel more forthcoming to testify or to give statements in testimony. But certainly, I think that that case is going to be part of it. In the aftermath of that, they have witnesses that say he bragged about intimidating witnesses, paying off jurors. certain when you have that kind of stuff, if you go back and you find that juror that was paid off,
present,
or jurors
and no
multiple
longer
that
has a
have been paid
voice who
off,
will pursue justice for her
certainly
accusation.
that gives you the impetus to
As of
kind
the
come
taken against
forward
Diddy,
and refresh
no
those
expansion
charges
of the
on a federal
investigation,
case. So the
no
federal
isolation
cases will
orders,
be a little
no
different.
equipment
The
access,
charges are a little
no
different,
suspension of
so it's
attorney
not
communication.
double jeopardy.
Everything inside
And so I
solitary
think
Block
that-
C
that-
continued as
that
before.
case that you mentioned,
Everything
that you
except the
cite,
fear.
I think is
If a
certainly
female
one
warden
of the
can
ones they're
vanish after
looking
a
to
single
go
note,
into a
thing
much
except
bigger,
the
to
fear.
me, maybe
If a
result
female
type
warden
case.
can
We
vanish
also
after
know
a
that
single note,
federal
ones who
investigators
once
have
worked
spoken to
overnight in
other
that
plaintiffs
area,
in
the
civil
ones who
cases
filed
against
for leave
Diddy
without
to
giving a
learn more
reason,
about his
the ones who saw
personality
but
and
never
what he's
spoke.
like in
No one
relationships.
mentions the
That
note,
means
but
J-Lo
everyone
is
knows
someone
it
the feds
appeared.
will want to
And
talk
if what
to
it says
they
is
haven't
true,
already.
then
It
punishment.
also means she
Part
could be
3.
called to testify
The person no
against him.
longer in the
It's
system.
possible.
The
It's
internal personnel
absolutely
database
possible.
of the Atlanta
If
Federal
I was
Detention
the
Center
prosecutor
updated its
handling
weekly
that
roster.
case, I
Under the
absolutely
category
would list
Special
right.
Personnel Code
But
Adjustment,
of course we need
the
to
name
know
of
whether or
Warden
not she'd
TD
be
was marked as
cooperative. That, of
removed
course,
from
changes the
system by
strategy when it
administrative
comes
order.
to trial.
There was
So
no
you
decision
list
number
someone as a
recorded,
potential
but was
witness. That
deactivated.
does not
Her
mean
personal
you're
contact
necessarily
information
going to call them. The
disappeared from the
question
internal
is whether or
network
not
exactly
they're going to
36 hours
testimony
after
is
she
really
filed her
going to help
complaint.
you.
The changelog
That
was
there is
executed
a
from the
universe
system's
where she could
highest
testify
access level
against him
server,
in
a
terms
device
of,
bearing the
violence
identifier
in terms of his
DCCA1,
interactions with
located
other
in the
artists,
coordination office on
especially
the
the
4th
folks that
floor
have
of the
been coming
Security
forward
Administration
alleging
Wing.
that he has harmed
Only
them
2
in some
individuals
way
possess
or
the authority to
engaged
perform
in,
a system-level
human
personnel
trafficking
removal at
and
that
sex
tier,
trafficking.
the head of
So,
Federal Human
was she aware of
Resources
any of that
and
going
Detention
on?
Center.
Did she see him
No
with
confirmation
underage girls,
exists
or
as patient was
she
made.
present for when some
The
of those
removal of
videos
Warden
were taken that
TD's
little
name was not
broadened,
accompanied by any
included screenshots of those
or
videos
protective
with his
reassignment.
pleadings. So how much of that
At
did she know?
11:20
When did she
a.m.,
know
a
it?
printed
And what
copy of the
actions did she
personnel
take at the
deployment
time?
chart was
Is that
generated
part
in
of the reason why
preparation
they
for the
broke
new
up?
week's
We don't
schedule.
know. So
Under
all
the
of this
section
still
marked
to be
Internal
seen.
Alert,
Obviously, the
TD's name
prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she'd be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named either. He specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, into talks. It reads in part, quote, Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties affiliation with and/or sponsorship of Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties, garner legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British Royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything, but why bring him up? I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically he being Diddy was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bring all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings, so it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that came out in connection with the Eusine case, that they were close and that they traveled together. And, there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage. That would be a different story. But Prince Harry and the way that it was mentioned to be very, again, just sort of trying
will
to
leave
bring
you speechless.
legitimacy and
When the
talk
first
about
images
these
from the
were
federal
people
raid
that
on Diddy's
that
$40 million
TT
Los Angeles
surrounded
estate were
himself
released,
by to
no one
protect
expected
himself.
this.
Prince Harry
Neatly
has
stacked
no
in
criminal
display cabinets
charges
like
or
prized
even
possessions
any
were
accusations
200
of
bottles of
illegal
baby oil.
activity,
Right
but
next
he
to
could
them,
still see
over
the inside of a
900 bottles of
courtroom in a
lubricant,
defamation
rows and
case.
rows.
It's
It looked less
possible
like a
that Prince
home
Harry
and more
may
like a
be able to
warehouse for
preserve
something
his
far more
reputation,
disturbing.
and
These
since
weren't
it
the
was
kind of
such a
items most
minuscule
people keep
mention
in
the
bulk, but for
greater
investigators,
context
it
of this
painted a
filing,
chilling
he
picture.
may be okay.
Why would one of the most
Another
powerful men in
celebrity
hip-hop
mentioned in
need this
Lil Rod's
much?
lawsuit
And more
is Young
importantly,
Miami,
what
who
exactly were they
dated Diddy
used for?
from the lawsuit, Young
It started
Miami's
with a
cousin
knock, then a
assaulted
battering
Lil Rod
ram, On a
During the
quiet morning
Thanksgiving
in March
holiday in
2024,
2020, similar to
Homeland
Prince
Security
Harry,
agents
there are no
stormed Sean Diddy
allegations
Combs'
against young
LA
Miami
mansion in the
herself,
elite
so
neighborhood of
there's
Palm Beach
probably
Hills.
no worry of
Not long
charges being
after,
filed
another
against
team
her,
hit his
but
Miami
there could be
property on the
charges
glitzy
against
Star
some of
Island.
the other people
These weren't just
listed in
casual
Lil Rod's
searches, these
lawsuit.
were federal
That's
raids
people
with
like
helicopters
Diddy's chief of
overhead,
staff,
agents in full
Christina
tactical
Quorum,
gear,
who
and
Lil Rod
entire
compares
blocks
to
on
Jalen
lockdown.
Maxwell,
What were they
the
looking for?
longtime
That
companion of
question didn't
Jeffrey
stay
Epstein.
unanswered for
Epstein
long.
died by
Inside the
suicide in
sprawling
2019
17,000
when he
square foot
faced
mansion,
numerous
agents
charges of
uncovered a
sexual
scene that left
assault.
even
Over the
seasoned
course of
investigators.
Combs
multiple
allegedly
years,
planned
Maxwell
and
was charged
controlled the
and
sex
found guilty of
performances,
sex trafficking in
which he
relation to
called
her time with
freak-offs,
Epstein, and she is
and he
serving
often
a lengthy
electronically
prison
recorded
sentence.
them.
Will Rod
A few
says
bottles.
Christina
We're
Quorum
talking
ordered
hundreds.
sex
It looked
workers
less like
and prostitutes for Mr. Combs and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Combs and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in La NYC and Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment too, saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil lubricant, extra linens, and lighting. Federal prosecutors also alleged these associates arranged travel for victims and commercial sex workers, delivered large sums of cash to Diddy to pay these sex workers, and even scheduled the delivery of IV fluid. So according to Melba, it's possible some of these associates are charged too. None of these cases, when you have these high-profile people that have been using people over years, these cases happen without a handler. Kelly had a handler, Epstein had a handler, Weinstein had a handler. Everybody has in those scenarios of those powerful people, powerful men that are abusing other people. They have someone that does their dirty work. And it's usually not only just one person, it's several people who may have different duties. So again, seeing this woman being his handler, being the person to get him drugs, being the person to procure sex workers for him, being the person to basically be on cleanup duty in case of, covering up or silencing people that might want to come forward, that's not unusual. And she is also going to bear the brunt of criminal liability, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did, and basically had to take the entire brunt of the criminal justice system alone because of the fact that, Epstein committed suicide and was not able to be held accountable. And we can't talk about Diddy without mentioning Cassie, the one whose lawsuit blew the lid off Diddy's alleged scheme. She filed civil suit against Diddy last November under the New York Survivor Act, meaning any sexual assault survivor could file suit against their accused predator, and the statute of limitation didn't matter. Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was still made public, dropping a laundry list of bombshells about Diddy that the public hadn't previously heard. Cassie's lawsuit outlined years of abuse by Diddy, starting she was just 19 years old, and at the time he was 37. According to her suit, Diddy was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat Cassie savagely. Cassie alleged that he forced her to use drugs and would physically beat her or force her to have sex with prostitutes. Then there's the gun allegation that, on at least 2 occasions, Diddy demanded Cassie hold his gun in her purse. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, "There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous." This echoes similar allegation made by Lil Rod about Jennifer Lopez's part in the 1999 New York nightclub shooting. Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at years later, Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went out to different events. So again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain activities to prove loyalty to, basically put yourself in a bad situation. Only he can be the one to save you, basically. So in seeing that the parallels between J-Lo's experience and Cassie's experience, number one, it brings more credibility to what Cassie said in her pleadings, but also again, it causes us to look at Jennifer Lopez and be like, some of the comments she made about the end of her relationship to Diddy in terms of, well, there was infidelity and, she kind of skirted the issue a bit.
But when you start to look back at her comments, you start to think, oh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy? Much like how Cassie ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him. Cassie kind of broke his floodgate, so to speak, when she made her civil suit back in November. These crazy allegations, we'd never heard anything like it before. And then all of a sudden we have several more people coming forward, and then more when it turns to 2024. So we have multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward, alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's loss opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, just a huge moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward, and we know statistically male victims of sexual assault generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly. And Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this is what happened to me. And that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including most recently Diddy K, one of the members of Diddy Kane, stating that he had abused her, and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward and saying, listen, there's something here, the feds took notice, and even though they may not have been public about it at first, we knew obviously when they searched the houses, we knew that this was getting very serious. But they were monitoring this the minute that Cassie filed her lawsuit, and they read those allegations. I can assure you that investigations started immediately, and then, as more and more survivors came forward, again, the feds would be going and interviewing each of those people, seeing what evidence they have. So for instance, do they have maybe some cell phone footage? Can they substantiate
present,
what occurred
and
to
no
them
longer has a
in other
voice
ways?
who will pursue
Maybe
justice
follow-up
for her
text
accusation.
messages, emails, all of
As of
these
the
things
taken
are
against
aspects
Diddy,
that they are
no
able to
expansion
use
of the
to now bring in
investigation,
their
no
case
isolation orders,
against
no
people.
equipment
Months
access,
ago, we
no
reported
suspension
that
of attorney
Cassie was working with
communication.
federal
Everything
investigators in
inside
the case
Solitary
against
Block
Diddy.
C
We can't know
continued
for
as
sure
before.
whether she testified
Everything
in the
except
grand
the
jury
fear.
hearing that would
If a
ultimately
female
indict
warden
Diddy,
can
but it's
vanish
likely
after
at
a
least some
single
of his
note, thing
accusers
except
that
the
I do
fear.
believe
If a
that
female
number of
warden can
survivors
vanish
will
after a
testify.
single
I don't
note,
think
the
that
ones
they
who
would have
once
brought
worked
all of them
overnight in that
because of
area,
the fact that
the ones
number
who
one,
filed for
to want
leave
to
without giving a
testify
reason,
is
the ones who saw
traumatizing,
but never spoke.
especially when you're
No one
talking
mentions
about
the
the most
note,
awful day
but
likely
everyone
of your
knows it
life,
appeared.
and some
And if what
very
it says is
degrading things that
true,
happened
then
to you, and you
punishment.
have to tell
Part
that to a
3.
bunch of people
The
you don't
person no
know.
longer in
So
the system. The internal personnel database of the Atlanta Federal Detention Center updated its weekly roster. Under the category Special Personnel Code Adjustment, the name of Warden TD was marked as removed from system by administrative order. There was no decision number recorded. It was deactivated. Her personal contact information disappeared from the internal network exactly 36 hours after she filed her complaint. The changelog was executed from the system's highest access level server, a device bearing the identifier DCCA1, located in the coordination office on the 4th floor of the Security Administration Wing. Only 2 individuals possess the authority to perform a system-level personnel removal at that tier, the head of Federal Human Resources and Detention Center. No confirmation exists as the was made. The removal of Warden TD's name was not accompanied by any or protective reassignment. At 11:20 a.m., a printed copy of the personnel deployment chart was generated in preparation for the new week's schedule. Under the section marked Internal Alert, TD's name
jury to testify, and when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point, because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of these survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that have to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial then? At the trial now, the key is that the U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, where as well as Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time, or more so not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person that may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course, they'll be brought to testify. But again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors after his indictment. This week, Diddy pleaded not guilty to all charges and was denied bond twice. Statement from his legal team reads, quote, Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made, entrepreneur, loving
will leave
family
you
man, and
speechless.
proven
When the
philanthropist
first
who has
images from
spent
the
the
federal
last
raid
30
on
years
Diddy's
building
$40
an
million
empire adoring
Los
his
Angeles
children
estate were
and
released,
working to
no one
uplift the
expected
Black
this.
community.
Neatly
He is
stacked
an
in display
imperfect
cabinets
person,
like prized
but is not
possessions
criminal
were
to
200
his
bottles
credit.
of baby oil.
Mr. Combs
Right next
has
to
been
them,
nothing but
over
cooperative
900
with
bottles
this
of lubricant,
investigation,
rows
and
and
he
rows.
voluntarily
It looked less like a
relocated to New
home
York
and more
last
like a
week in
warehouse for something
anticipation
far
of
more
these charges.
disturbing.
Please
These weren't the
reserve
kind
your
of items
judgment
most
until
people
you have
keep in
all the
bulk,
facts.
but for
These are the
investigators,
acts of
it
an
painted a
innocent
chilling
man
picture.
with nothing
Why
to
would one of
hide,
the most
and
powerful men
forward
in
to
hip-hop
clearing
need
his
this
name in
much?
court. More
And more
updates are sure
importantly,
to come
what
in the case
exactly
of
were they
United
used
States
for?
versus Diddy. So
It
make sure
started
to
with a knock,
subscribe to our
then a
YouTube
battering
page so
ram.
you don't miss
On
a
a
thing.
quiet morning in March
Reporting for Law&Crime,
2024,
I'm
Homeland
Sierra
Security